Now, I've enjoyed every experience I've had as a legislator, and I'm proud of the things I've accomplished. And a lot of things. The lottery is my signature bill, and it's one that took 20 years to pass. Tennessee's got the most difficult constitution in the country to amend, and we finally did amend it, got it to the voters, they approved it, and we've got this Tennessee Education Lottery, which is $3 billion, been very successful. It was a landmark issue in Tennessee because a lot of people didn't think it would ever happen. I was amazed when I drove through Tennessee. Basically, I kind of took the campaign on myself. It was me, my girlfriend, and our dog. And we drove around the state. And one time we got a plane and flew around the state, took my mother too, and made speeches and saw a lot of places in East Tennessee. You'd have thought I had horns. It was just amazing what they said about me, and they thought it was going to be the end of the world, and the river was going to reverse course, and we'd have another Reelfoot Lake, and scurvy would be all over Tennessee. And none of those things happened, so it worked out okay. I was introduced one time by a friend named Polly Draper. Polly is an actress and a playwright. She was in 30-something. Some of y'all might have seen her. Her husband and I are friends, and she's a friend too. And she had been in the play The Exonerated, DNA Evidence, the Innocence Project. And she'd been in that play. And this is, I think, why she said this. But when she introduced me, Bernice, she said, I've known Congressman Cohen since we used to call him Senator Steve. And that was an appellation that my dear friend Warren Zevon attached to me. It was our nexus. We were friends with her. He was friends with her husband and me, and we put us together. And she said he got that appellation because he was served in the Tennessee State Penitentiary for 24 years. And I think she had that from doing The Exonerated, where everybody was, after serving 18 years in the Texas State Penitentiary, DNA evidence. But anyway, it wasn't that bad. It was pretty good. Congress is okay. I appreciate your work, and so much of what you do moves justice forward. Most things that we have in justice, most issues that move things forward in our country have come through the courts. They have not come through the legislatures. Brown versus Board of Education, Loving versus Virginia, Gideon, Wainwright. I mean, all kind of cases over the years have come through. There's been judges who've made decisions after lawyers have made arguments. So, we had a bill up last week, which unfortunately, I hate to tell you this, but the opinion of the ABA and the opinion of my side lost. But it was concerning some civil side issues, and to have the ABA's support is important. Sometimes people listen, but at least you know you've got the Betty Crocker Good Housekeeping seal of approval, and y'all move things forward. There are a lot of things changing, and while we get a lot of our input from groups like the ABA that do so much good, and I was so pleased by your statement about commutations. That's been very dear to my heart. Lawyers play such a keen role in that issue and others. I know that it will not come as a shock to any of you that our criminal justice system is broken, and it is broken, and that's what the President met yesterday with many police officials, law enforcement officials. I was invited and would like to have attended, but we had a long transportation markup of an infrastructure bill. We're going to have an infrastructure bill finally, and had some other issues to deal with, so I couldn't get off the Hill. But it was about our nation's prison population and how large it is. It's shocking that we have more prisoners than any country in the world. We are the gulag of nations. We're the greatest nation in the world, but somehow or another we're the worst as far as incarcerating our own. 5% of the world's population is here in the United States, yet 20% of the prison population is here. And even the police, my police director, Tony Armstrong, and many policemen from all over, I think it was New York, Chicago, and most of the American League, and we got down to the AAA with Memphis, they were there yesterday and encouraging prison sentencing, criminal sentencing reform, and that the prisons are too crowded. They are. Mandatory minimums were a big mistake. They were popular in the 90s, and over the past 30 years, our prison population has increased 500%. And there's an amazing and shocking racial disparity to that population. More than 60% are racial and ethnic minorities, and the impact that on the criminal justice system's had the African American community has been extremely harmful, damaging. 1 in 3 African American males can expect to go to prison at some time in their lifetime. 1 in 3. For African American males in their 30s, 1 of every 10 is in prison or jail on any given day. And that has ramifications that are harmful to the community when they're not male father figures around. The population, you talk about a war on women. There's 6 men for every 10 women in the African American community. That's not good. I think the women, I should get an amen out of that, shouldn't I? The prison population is also aging. And the fastest growing population at federal correctional facilities now is prisoners over the age of 50. From 2009 to 2013, that population increased by 25%. And the economic cost of keeping those people in prison is staggering. Health care costs skyrocketed 55% in the Bureau of Prisons in recent years. We spend roughly the same amount on health care for prisoners as we do on the entire agency that put many of them there, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Makes no sense whatsoever. In the commutation and pardon area, there are a lot of people in there that are old. The older you get, the less likely you are to have friends that can help you work in crime, and less likely you want to do crime. We should be letting those people out instead of keeping them in there, warehousing them, and spending a lot of money on health care costs in prison. But that's gone on. A lot of this has happened. A lot of the problems in the prison system is because of the failed war on drugs. The war on drugs was failed from its inception. In the 30s, Harry Anslinger, war on Hispanics, and that's why he called marijuana and not cannabis, because that was tied to the Latino population, and they made marijuana illegal, and it's gone on for years. Richard Nixon studied it. His administration studied it. I guess it was the governor. I think it was Schaefer from Pennsylvania, but it was they had a study, and they recommended decriminalization, or at the minimum, it might have been legalization, but I think it was decriminalization. But Nixon was one of his 2 guys that were his awful henchmen. It was either Haldeman or Ehrlichman. I think it was Haldeman. Said it was just too good an issue to give up, and they wouldn't do it. And Nixon made some awful remarks about African Americans and drugs, and a way to keep them, controlling them and using the war on drugs as in essence a way to work the Southern strategy of taking over the country politically by taking the Southern states, which has worked, unfortunately. And he made some remarks about Jews, too. He was not fond of Jews either. It's always the Jews that want to do this liberal stuff. Right on. Mandatory minimums were a major problem, and the crack cocaine disparity was one, too. And crack cocaine disparity is racial. Oftentimes, powder coke is associated with Beverly Hills and white folks, and crack was people in the hood. And a 100-to-1 ratio made no sense. But again, it was a racial disparity. And the Fairness in Sentencing Act changed that to 1 to 18 instead of 1 to 100. I'm never supposed to ever say this, and I'm not going to say it. At least I'm going to deny it.
Okay.
But I was told that when the president signed the bill, he turned away and said, this should be 1 to 1. The president knows math. 58% of Americans in a recent Gallup poll support legalization of marijuana. Come a long way. Talk about a failed war on drugs. And yet marijuana is a Schedule I drug. Schedule I. No medical benefit, and most likely to be abused and for you to be hooked on. Right there with heroin, LSD, methaqualone that I don't think you can even get anymore. There's another drug in there. Not meth, but it's a joke to think marijuana is in there with heroin and acid and quaaludes. It's just not the same. It should be changed and should be studied. The cannabinoids part of marijuana helps a lot of young people, apparently, according to Sanjay Gupta and a lot of other physicians, with epilepsy and other conditions that are similar. And a lot of people, Montel Williams especially, thinks it's really good for you. You should do it instead of a bagel in the morning, probably. But Montel does have an illness, and he says it helps. And it certainly helps people with cancer and nausea associated with chemotherapy. So I think we should study it. 23 states in the District of Columbia made medical marijuana legal. There are about, I think, 5 states now that have made recreational use. 4 states in D.C., Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and then D.C. So we're changing on those policies, but we need to. People should not lose their liberties because of marijuana. They shouldn't lose scholarships. They shouldn't lose the opportunity to be in public housing, and they shouldn't lose jobs. It's just a spiraling problem for something that's much akin to alcohol and much akin to what went on with Prohibition, a failed policy that made gangsters rich, made Americans unhappy and criminals, and didn't really do too much good for the society. Matter of fact, it did none. I'm going to digress a little bit here and talk about something I did yesterday. We had, before Judiciary Committee, we had James Comey, and the new FBI director. And I think the world of him. I think he's a phenomenal director and a great guy. And when he was in the Justice Department, he was a hero and trying to hold up some things they were trying to do that were wrong. He's really a good guy. But the building that he works in is named for J. Edgar Hoover. And I've always disliked that man ever since I learned about him. And it's interesting how people can think about you and what they say about you. I've thought his name shouldn't be on any building, that he was the opposite of justice. He had notes written to Dr. King to suggest he knew about affairs that Dr. King engaged in and that he would release those affairs and ruin his reputation unless he committed suicide. He sent some tapes that he had taken of Dr. King and a friend to Mrs. King. He did some terrible things trying to crack down on SNCC. Julian Bond was a dear friend of mine, and John Lewis is a great friend, and they were great SNCC members, and SNCC did a lot of wonderful things, a great organization, and the SLC. And I saw a movie recently called, a documentary that's on yahoo.news called Uniquely Nasty, and it showed the awful, awful things that Hoover did toward homosexuals, called them sex deviants, and asked that the FBI, as a memo that came out about 2 years ago through FOIA requests, it showed he asked that every FBI agent go through with a green liner and underline the names of anybody they suspected of being gay. And then he got them out of the Bureau and tried to get them out of federal government. Bad guy, and I think his name. So I put a bill in yesterday with about 10, 11 co-sponsors, John Lewis, John Conyers, Charlie Rangel, Barbara Lee, Maxine Waters, Jared Polis, round up the usual suspects, good folks, honored to be with them. And we put the bill in to take his name off the building. It won't pass, but I know I'm not going to be in Congress forever, and while I'm here, I'm going to do the things that I think are right and make a statement. And that's a statement to be made, because J. Edgar Hoover's name is not one that should adorn a building that's about justice and about good people in the FBI. It's about the opposite of justice and trying to stop the progress in this country. And so in my opinion, it's important to make those statements. Sometimes you can't totally make a difference, but you can chip away. Tiny ripples of hope, Dr. Robert Kennedy talked about in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we put it in, and I've looked at some stuff on Facebook, and some people said I was pandering. And I thought, pandering? My God. I just said, you got a chance to take a stand. I'm a congressman. I'm going to do the things I'd like to do if I wasn't a congressman. So that's one of the things I did yesterday. And hopefully I told Mr. Comey that the new FBI building will be named for somebody else. Maybe for him. Maybe for Don Edwards, who was a great congressman from California and an FBI agent. But somebody else. Justice needs to go forward, and we need to hold it to high standards. He responded, and I didn't say anything publicly. He said, well, it's a tough position to put Comey in. And he said, you have to look at things through the lens of history. And yes, Hoover did some things that were wrong and bad, and I certainly know that, but he did some good things for the country too. And I thought, you could say the same thing about Stalin. but that would have been too much in the papers, I think. Anyway, back to my speech. Judges couldn't make a difference on low-level drug prosecutions, unfortunately, and we're looking to see that they can. Those long sentences, as I've said, have just sent people to prison, harmed families, harmed neighborhoods, and taken fathers away from their children and children away from fathers. Some experts have suggested that that social disorder created by the increased incarceration have had the opposite of the intended effect of making those societies better, because it's actually given a rise to crime because of people being away and out of the community. The prison sentences don't bring relief. Reentry presents its own set of challenges. Employers are reluctant to hire ex-offenders even if the offenses were nonviolent decades ago. Without a job, ex-offenders face a monumental task of reestablishing their lives and making ends meet. But there's finally bipartisan momentum in Congress to revisit these failed policies and reform our criminal justice system. That's the good news. The Fair Sentencing Act passed. Bobby Scott was on Judiciary at the time, and he was the prime sponsor, and I joined with him. And that was a step forward, and it was bipartisan. The Fair Sentencing Act should have been retroactive. It wasn't. So we have people who are in prison for what I consider, and I think definitely would be considered, laws that are void against public policy. I don't know if there's a time, and if there is, y'all can help me with it, where there has been a legislative body and then an executive approving it so it's become law to reduce, in essence, the amount of time people are supposed to spend in prison. It doesn't happen that way. So when that happens, you've set a public policy of what the penalty should be, and the old sentences are accordingly void against public policy. So it should have been retroactive, and anybody in there for a sentence longer than what the sentence would be today under the 18-to-1 ratio, which again should be 1-to-1 in the Fairness and Sentencing Act, is in there for a sentence that's void against public policy because we've spoken and said that's wrong. Well, the U.S. Sentencing Commission has started to address the issue. It's taken them a while, but they have. It voted unanimously last year to reduce sentencing guidelines for many drug trafficking offenses and make those guidelines retroactive. Now judges can act, and earlier this month the Department of Justice announced that approximately 6,000 inmates will be released. Well, that's, in my opinion, great. It's not nearly enough. There are tens of thousands of inmates who should be released who are in there for sentences longer than what is necessary or longer than what the law currently is, and they should be released. Of those 6,000, 2,000 are foreigners, otherwise known in the parlance as mules, and they'll be going home, reunited with their families, and no longer on our ledger book. There are 46,000 offenders eligible for release under the new guidelines. 46,000. So 6,000 just the beginning. It's a huge problem, and it'll take significant action from Congress. And there are, again, bipartisan efforts underway. The Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act of 2015, introduced earlier this month by a bipartisan group of senators led by Chuck Grassley of Iowa, Dick Durbin of Illinois, who's the Democratic leader, assistant Democratic leader, and ranking member Patrick Leahy, and John Cornyn, and a whole list of senators to both parties. It looks like that bill's going to pass. And in the House, we've got a bipartisan group supporting it too. Bob Goodlatte's on the bill, as well as John Conyers, who is our chairman and our ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. I'm on that bill as well, but there's a good bipartisan representation. It would reduce mandatory minimums for prior drug offenses. It would reduce the 3-strike penalty from life imprisonment to 25 years and reduce the 20-year mandatory minimum to 15 years. I'd rather see him just eliminate it entirely, but Grassley wanted that, and that's the process. Change is evolutionary, not revolutionary, and I'm pleased with Senator Grassley's working with us, and we're going to keep going. The safety valve would also be broadened, where judges could tailor sentences more appropriately on a case-by-case basis. The bill would allow prisoners to earn time credits for participation in recidivism reduction programs such as education and job training. And the Senate Judiciary Committee did approve that bill yesterday. In the House, we're moving forward. We have 21 co-sponsors. Earlier this year, Jim Sensenbrenner, who is a marvelous gentleman, is Human Encyclopedia Britannica, and Bobby Scott introduced the bipartisan Safe, Accountable, Fair, Effective Justice Act. An acronym for it is SAFE. This was the product of work of the House Judiciary Committee's bipartisan over-criminalization task force. And like the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act, it would focus prison space on violent and career criminals where it should be, and do more to encourage the use of specialty courts like drug, veterans, and mental health courts to help ensure people coping with substance abuse or mental health problems are treated for their conditions instead of just warehoused in prison. There's a growing bipartisan support to reform our laws regarding marijuana, especially medical. 86% of Americans, according to a CBS News poll, thought doctors should be allowed to prescribe small amounts of marijuana for patients suffering from serious illnesses. 86% of Americans rarely agree on anything, not even vanilla ice cream, but they agree that doctors should be able to prescribe for their patients. Sanjay Gupta, who was once a skeptic, has now endorsed medical marijuana. But federal law continues to treat patients and doctors and families who care for them like criminals. I had a constituent, young constituent, she couldn't vote, Chloe Grauer, who was 3 years old. She suffered from a rare neurological disease, somewhat like epilepsy, and she had 100 to 200 seizures a day. I went and visited her home. She tried dozens of medications, surgical procedures, nothing stopped the seizures. Her parents tried to get the cannabidiol, I never can get that quite right, cannabidiol, also known as Charlotte's Web, which is a lot easier. And of course, it's not legal in Tennessee. You couldn't get it. You have to go to Colorado, and they'd have to go get it and bring it back and be committing a crime. But the Colorado people said they would give her the drug, and the day that they found that out, Chloe died. That shouldn't happen in America. And there is strong efforts to change that, including in Congress, to make CBD legal. But currently it's illegal. And you don't get, if you do the CBDs, it's the part of the marijuana that doesn't make you eat, doesn't make you laugh, doesn't make you giggle, no high involved. I introduced the Compassionate Access, Research, Expansion, and Respect States Act. The acronym there is CARES, C-A-R-E-R-S, CARES Act. Don Young, who's the dean of the Republicans in the House, is my co-sponsor from Alaska. We've got a bipartisan group. I think we've got 8 Republicans now and 8 Democrats on it. We're holding the Democrats back till we get more Republicans to keep it balanced. And it's been a little effort to get the 8 Republicans, but we've gotten them. And some people have come forth. It's starting to be where some Republicans are seeing it as it's a generational issue, and they also see it as a libertarian freedom issue, which it is as well. In the Senate, it's the same bill that Rand Paul, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Cory Booker introduced. And it would deal with specific areas where state law and federal law conflict, in that states where states have legalized medical marijuana or marijuana, it tells the federal people not to go in and enforce federal law as long as the states are doing it right. Brandeis said the states are the laboratories of democracy, and that's the wonderful thing about the state system. States can try something and you can learn from them. And that's what's going on in Colorado and Washington and Oregon. States should have their own medical marijuana policies as well, and CBD should be available for doctors to prescribe. The VA doesn't allow its doctors to recommend medical marijuana to their patients. We think they should. In states where it's legal, VA doctors shouldn't have a muzzle on them. Banking practices should be open to the marijuana industry where it's legal. Otherwise, they've got to deal with cash, and that involves crime because people knock you off for cash. So they should be able to have banking and not just a cash business. There is growing bipartisan support to get those policies passed and also for recreational marijuana. I don't know why they call it recreational marijuana. They don't call it recreational alcohol, do they? But I guess they are. I don't know. Oftentimes we have budget amendments. Dana Rohrabacher is kind of the leader on those, and I've worked with him. And years ago, was a guy named Maurice Hinchey, who was a really fine congressman from New York State, to tell the federal folks we wouldn't give funds to the DEA if they infringed in states where they had legalized marijuana, or at least medical marijuana. And we passed that. And each year I've been in Congress, it's gone up. The first year there were about 160 folks, and there were no Republicans. Then it got to be about 175, 180, and the last time we had it, it was about 245 voted for it, and there were about 50 Republicans. So we're making a lot of progress. The president is starting to take more use of his unbridled authority to issue pardons and commutations. And I've been on the president for a while. I'm a supporter of the president. He's a supporter of mine, helps me with the judgeships. We don't have a Democratic senator, and we don't have another Democratic congressman from my district, so that's how I've had the opportunity to recommend Bernice and 3 other people to district court judgeships. But the president hasn't used his commutation and pardon power as he should. And I've talked to him for about 3 years about it every time I see him, and he's kind of like, all right, Cohen, we know. This year I told him, I said, I got 3 C's for you for your agenda. Cuba, cannabis, and commutations. He's doing better on Cuba and commutations and cannabis, but he's coming around. The president has commuted 46 sentences of people who were in for drug crimes, usually the crack cocaine disparity individuals. But there are thousands he should be commuting, and he has unlimited, unbridled authority. Now, he's gone through a system. He didn't know that there was a guy named Rogers in charge of the pardon office. And I was in the White House, and I said something to him about it, and he was kind of oblivious to it. And I said something to Dennis McDonough, and he was clueless to it as well. But Rogers was a holdover from the Bush days as far as being in charge of the pardons office. And he had been a DEA attorney, I believe, and he'd been a military tribunal judge. Not exactly the guy that you'd figure would be great on letting people out of prison. And he didn't. And he recommended hardly anybody, and he was cited by the IG for sometimes not giving evidence in some very noteworthy cases that should have gone forward that would have allowed people probably to get pardons. And the president kept saying to McDonough and Valerie Jarrett, why might I get more people for commutations? And he just wasn't getting them. It was because Rogers was still there, and he spent 6 years in that office. He should have gone on day 1. But they've got a good woman in there now, and they've got a good team, and they're trying to do it, but it's very voluminous, the number of applicants to go through it. That's why you need to volunteer, and that's why I was so proud to hear that, to help get that process through and get people justice, get them out of prison. Cost us $30,000 a person to keep them in prison, keeps them from their families, and they're in there for no reason at all at this point. So that's a major, major issue. Now, law enforcement's still an issue we've got to deal with. Ferguson, North Charleston, Staten Island, awful situations. Cleveland, Ohio, got a case in Memphis where the Justice Department's monitoring. Young man, not a jewel. I mean, he had 6 years earlier, he had a warrant for his arrest for some juvenile offense. 6 years earlier, he was 19, 20 years old, routine traffic stop. Policeman gets him out of the car, puts him in his car. Why they took him, he wasn't even the driver. It was a traffic stop. Take him out, check him out, finds out he's got these 2 warrants from 6 years ago for juvenile offenses in Iowa and Illinois. I don't think they're going to extradite him. I wouldn't imagine. And had the young man handcuffed, and the young man got in a scuffle with the officer, and the video showed him rolling around on the ground, and the young man running away, and the officer shot him. Well, that's still under investigation by the local DA, but you just can't shoot people because they're running away unless there's potential harm to somebody else that's life-threatening. There's certainly no situation like that, no weapon involved, no indication of that. The DAs do a great job. They got a tough job, but they shouldn't be put in the difficult position of having to make the decision of whether to indict a police officer or a sheriff's deputy who has used deadly force, possibly improperly, because the DAs work hand in hand with law enforcement. And we saw in New York where, I guess it was de Blasio, took some action. The police responded adversely to him. Didn't want to do their job. They had sick outs, turned their backs on him, et cetera, et cetera. The DA's got to work with law enforcement, so it puts an inherent conflict of interest in making that decision. I think we should use a burn center grant money or some other monies that we make from the federal government as a carrot and stick approach, and say if states don't come up with systems where they get an independent prosecutor to make that decision, they won't get additional funds. We need to find a way, and I've introduced a bill to do that, to see that there's independent, non-conflict of interest determination of when a law enforcement officer should be indicted. Law enforcement's got a tough job, but they should not be taking lives, and if they act improperly, they need to be subject to the law like everybody else. Police departments right now are not required to report the data on when they use deadly force, and That's wrong too, and we've got bills, and Bobby Scott had passed a bill, and we've got another one a little different to require that. And Director Comey recently said it's ridiculous that he can't tell how many people were shot by the police last week, last month, or last year. And that's why we need to have better reporting. So we need better reporting, we need independent prosecutors. But we're coming a long way. The Washington Post investigation recently said there have been thousands of fatal shootings at the hands of police since 2005, but only 54 officers have been charged. Most were cleared or acquitted in the cases that have been resolved. Some jurisdictions, I think in Maryland, the prosecutors agreed that they would kind of have an interchange, and one prosecutor from a different jurisdiction would determine whether it would be an indictment or not. And that's a good start. But that hasn't happened and needs to happen, and we probably need legislation. There's a perception. It may not be a wrong, but there's a perception that there's a conflict and it's a buddy system, and that's wrong for law enforcement justice. Lacey Clay and I introduced the Police Training and Independent Review Act, which would not only have the prosecutor angle, but also require the police to be taught about minorities and have a better understanding of their communities and some sensitivity training. And that's important as well. Congress has a lot of work to do, and it's not just all about Planned Parenthood and Benghazi, although that's what you see in the news. In fact, a lot of the Republicans and Democrats often have much different constituencies because of redistricting, where most districts are one party or the other, and in the primaries are weighted toward the more liberal in the Democrat side, more conservative in the Republican side constituencies. So it drives us further and further apart. But most of us are friends. I've got lots of Republican friends, and I think most Democrats do as well. There's some places we do work together. Planned Parenthood and Benghazi are not two of them. I'm honored to be a member of Congress, even though our ratings are pretty low. I think we're in double digits. It's an honor to represent my district, and it's an honor to try to make our laws more just and more fair. As a lawyer by training, I appreciate what you do in the law. I got a lot of satisfaction from representing clients and getting them good results. I know you do too. So I've even had dreams that I was back in court sometimes, and I'd wake up and think, God, I kind of like that. You can't practice law. You have to do trust relationship to your constituents. All you can do is pay licensing fees and bar dues. You can't practice. Bernice, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you all. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Congressman, thank you so much. You referenced it, but I just want to again lift up Jim Feldman. You stood earlier. Jim, stand up just a second. Jim has basically dedicated his life and practice for the last several years heading up this clemency initiative, and he has knocked on doors and knocked on people, but he has been the head of our initiative on that process, and it's been wonderful, and he continues to do it even today. He's the immediate past chair of this section. Are there questions of Congressman Cohen? Questions, comments? Yes, Jim.
Is the law going to pass the House, the sentencing reform?
I think it will. I mean, I can't tell you. I can't get inside the Freedom Caucuses. But some of them might be for it. I mean, because the Koch brothers are pushing for these sentence reductions. They understand the cost to society. I think it will, because if Goodlatte gets behind it, which he has, gets through Judiciary Committee, I suspect it's got a chance to pass. Yeah, I mean, there's a songwriter named Don Schlitz, who's kind of a friend of mine back in Nashville, and his signature hit was "Got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them." That made him a lot of money. He spoke up here about 2 weeks ago, and he said, "Yeah, the new generation think I sell insurance." But he wrote a song about America and saying he likes America and he likes capitalism, but he's not for greed. And he said, when they tell you it's not about the money, it's about the money. So the money is driving this as well as justice, and that's a good thing. Let me tell you a quote I saw, Jim. I take it you're Jewish?
Yeah.
Okay. I was in the Holocaust Museum, and I found this quote kind of in a very poor spot. Not many people would see it. It's not a prominent quote, but it was from Einstein. And Albert Einstein said the reason why he was proud to be one of the Jewish people is because Jewish people are for knowledge for its own sake, seek knowledge for its own sake, have a striving for justice that borders on the fanatical, and a great streak for an independent streak. And I felt like Einstein described me, and I'm sure he describes you too. Justice is what drives us often.
Thank you. There's another question over here.
Congressman, we have a lot of people here, 3 or 4, who are on a task force to study the issue of body cameras and police wearing body cameras and how to activate them and how to use that data. I'm just wondering, is there any legislation that you're aware of that's out there on this topic of body cameras?
For the people in the back, this is a question about body cameras. Congressman?
Yeah, I think there is, and it's probably funding. But I tell you, the body cameras was the first blush I had with body cameras. And the idea was in Memphis, I thought it wouldn't happen. And now Memphis has got body cameras, and I think we've got the largest order for body cameras of any place in the country. I think we surpassed Cleveland, Ohio. It seemed like a great idea, but now the problem is getting the public the right and the defense counsel the right to look at the video. They're keeping that closed. They're letting the officers see it first, and the officers tailor their testimony to what's out there. And then I guess it would certainly be admissible at trial, and you could subpoena and get it, but they're not making it readily available. I mean, it's got great potential, but right now it's being used kind of in a one-sided way to help the police rather than help justice.
Okay. We'll take one more question, and I know the Congressman has much to do on the Hill, but we can take one more. Is there another question or comment?
If not, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Keep up your good work and keep sending progressive suggestions to Congress on what to do. It helps me some. Thank you.